Good morning, everyone. I wasn't actually planning on saying anything, so I'll be very quick just to say thanks so much to IRCA and to the university for the opportunity for us to be here today. I will leave the floor to the students to tell you a little bit about the Cities and Climate Action Forum, and I think they will also thank the, are you talking about our sponsors as well? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so just to recognize as well on my behalf that we're grateful both to the university and to the other supporters of this project that you'll hear about today. I'll just introduce our students. Christian, I'm going to say your last name wrong. Nyanyardis. I got it right, didn't I? Very good. Sharath Boledi and Jessica Yakubowski. And we're missing Lena Shaker, who hopefully will be here as well, but they are about half of the student group that we have working on the project. This is exam time coming up for them, so we've split our group in half. Half are here today, and half will be at the Climate Action Summit for high school students that Leamington Eco Schools are organizing on the 10th of December. So thanks very much for the opportunity to be here.
Municipalities are major contributors to climate change. According to UN Habitat, cities produce more than 60% of greenhouse gas emissions, yet they account for less than 2% of the Earth's surface. Sorry, I'm not sure if the PowerPoint... Okay, there we go, sorry. These numbers are astonishing and speak volumes to municipalities being at the forefront of the issue. On that note, we do want to acknowledge that 500 municipalities across Canada have joined in declaring climate emergency declarations. This is great. The symbolism behind the declarations is important, and it means something. It means something to putting municipalities on the record in support of climate emergency action. These declarations and intentions, however, are only made meaningful when backed up by the next step, action. The action phase is what we will be highlighting today. The focus of the Cities and Climate Action Forum is threefold. 1, public engagement on climate change responses in cities. 2, capacity building on these issues among youth and other community builders. And 3, direct research support to municipalities on the climate mitigation policy responses in Windsor, Essex, and municipalities across Ontario. Today's roadmap will include the following topics for action: adaptation versus mitigation, community energy plans, and specifically Windsor's community energy plan, and lastly, the resources for mayors and members of council, planning, engineering, and other senior staff with portfolios in relevant fields.
Good morning. I'm going to briefly cover what adaptation and mitigation are and also provide you with a bit of information on the risks of climate change. I'll keep this relatively short because I know the previous presenter did a great job in covering adaptation and mitigation. So NASA defines adaptation as adapting to life in a changing climate, which involves adjusting to actual or expected future climate, and mitigation as reducing climate change, which involves reducing the flow of heat-trapping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Natural Resources Canada says that while all levels of government have important adaptation responsibilities, the local nature of many of climate impacts means that municipalities are on the front line to ensure effective management of risks, protect community safety, and promote economic sustainability. Adaptive measures can be implemented through processes such as land use planning, community energy planning, and mechanisms like zoning or permit regulations. But municipalities must consider adaptation and mitigation measures, as we need to both adapt to current and future climate change effects and lessen their severity. In fact, the IPCC is clear in its contention that a failure to do so greatly increases the risks of climate change's negative consequences. Municipalities should also be specifically aware of some of the financial risks of climate change. First, physical risks, which include the diminishing value of companies' financial assets and rising insurance costs. This results from increasingly frequent and severe weather events that lead to municipal infrastructure and property damage. Second, liability risks. This includes the potential for litigation against companies that plaintiffs believe to be responsible for climate change-related harms. This will largely affect the energy sector, but this is a relatively new and ongoing phenomenon, and we don't necessarily know how our courts will continue to treat climate change litigants in the future. Thirdly, transitional risks, which result from the inevitable legislative and policy changes that will require businesses to revalue their assets. Unfortunately, the world is not heading in the right direction. UNEP, or the UN Environment Program, recently released their 10th emissions gap report. Among other things, it states that GHG emissions continue to rise despite scientific warnings and political commitments. In fact, total GHG emissions reached a record high in 2018 and continue to rise at a rate of 1.5% per year. The UN explained we now need to reduce emissions by 7.6% each year. By just 2025, the cut needed will steepen to 15.5% each year. And every day we delay, the more extreme, difficult, and expensive the cuts become. The report also includes a number of recommended mitigation measures, such as renewable energy electricity expansion, the phasing out of coal, which Ontario has obviously already done, decarbonization of transport and industry, and avoiding future emissions and energy access. Windsor has also experienced a rise in emissions. Industry emissions have risen 44%, although there has been a fall in commercial and institutional emissions by 16% and a fall in residential emissions by 8%. But there have been significant policy developments related to climate change over the years, including its recent adoption of a climate emergency declaration, its strategic vision, the official plan, the corporate energy management plan, the environmental master plan, and the corporate climate change action plan, all of which can be found online and that provide for various emissions reductions targets and city-specific means of adaptation and mitigation. All in all, adaptation is necessary, but more effective mitigation measures must be implemented. Whatever those measures may be, they need to be widely understood, respected, and properly enforced. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, let me just adjust. Okay. My name is Sharath Valetti, and along with Christian and Jessica, we're part of the Windsor Law School, and I'll be talking over the next 3 slides about 3 things. So the first about a community energy plan, what it is, Windsor's community energy plan, sort of highlighting what's going on, and then I'll just end on sort of the Windsor Climate Action Forum and just sort of talk about some of the work that's going on. Yeah. So, what is a community energy plan? So I understand the audience is mostly composed of sort of people who work in municipal governance, so you probably know about it, but I'll just sort of briefly do a run through. So a community energy plan is sort of a comprehensive long-term plan that defines community priorities around energy generation, usage, and delivery. And basically the framework includes sort of setting an emissions target, developing a local action plan, and implementing the plan. So why is it important? So obviously, there are 2 key benefits. So there's an environmental benefit and an economic benefit. Looking at just Windsor, the city emits approximately 1.9 million tons of greenhouse gases every year. At this rate, if sort of the current rate of growth continues, or it stays even, provincial emissions are forecasted to grow by 75%. This would significantly, obviously, dwarf the emission targets set by the federal government and the provincial government. On the fiscal side, Windsor spent $9 million on energy expenditures in 2014, and the community overall spent $842 million cumulatively. So if you just divide that by the number of residents in Windsor, that's $4,000 per person. So at the current rate of growth, Windsor is forecasted to spend between $1.8 billion and $3.2 billion by 2041 if nothing is done. So obviously, what are the benefits? Successfully planning and implementing a community energy plan builds awareness of energy usage and conservation principles. It identifies opportunities to conserve energy and even creates economic development and opportunities. So the next slide, just some highlights, sort of Windsor's energy plan. Windsor obviously has a target, and there's 2 important overarching goals. So the first is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and then also reduce the overall intensity of sort of energy usage by 40% if you use the 2014 baseline. So the goal year is 2041, and the same thing for the emission reduction goal. It is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2041, and the baseline being used once again is 2014. These targets are consistent with the provincial plan, and then they sort of meet the global effort to keep emissions below the 1.5 degree threshold. So Windsor has 7 key goals. I won't go through all of them. But basically, some of them, there's 7 key sectors, really. There's a residential, commercial, industrial, transportation, renewable energy. There's also an education and communication component, which we think is important. Obviously, this room is comprised of people from many different sectors, many different occupations, and so I think it's really important to acknowledge that climate change is not just a technical challenge, it's sort of an all-of-society challenge. So, so what have results been so far? So the Windsor Community Energy Plan was passed in 2017. It's been a mixed bag. There have been positives and negatives. So obviously, as Christian mentioned, last week the city passed a climate emergency resolution. However, if you look at the September report released by the city on greenhouse gas emissions and energy usage, between 2014 and 2018, emissions rose by 7.3%, and energy consumption rose by 5.9%. So, what can we do to sort of mitigate this? Obviously, we want to acknowledge there's been significant progress, and we want to encourage that progress. And we also acknowledge that Windsor is an industrial city with industrial heritage, so obviously there'll be higher emissions just because of the nature of industry. So, for instance, Windsor has passed an active transportation master plan, and we think its implementation should be a major focus. They want to encourage cycling, they want to improve transit, bus option, things like that, to sort of slowly move people away from like a car-based, industry towards a more sort of cleaner methods of transportation. And then obviously we acknowledge that the city is an industrial city. There's a lot of jobs that are dependent on sort of industrial occupations. But we also need to acknowledge that it emits greenhouse gas emissions. So that's why sort of concentrating efforts in sort of other sectors is also really important so we can mitigate some of the emissions. So for instance, there's an energy management forum that Windsor has set up or is going to set up. And so for instance, that will provide public education and also encourage sort of corporations to set out their own energy plans. And we think that it would be a good idea because manufacturers could be provided with resources and things like that so they're more aware of sort of the challenges. So overall, on the community energy plan front, there are a lot of opportunities to mitigate and adapt to climate change, and these are just some of the small examples we wanted to highlight to you. So here's the exciting part, the Climate Action Forum. So first of all, to start with, we're law students, and so we want to note that Windsor Law is an excellent resource and hub for action against climate change. Recently, Windsor Law began the Cities and Climate Action Forum, which is sort of a new student and faculty-driven interactive project on climate change mitigation at the local level. Forum is really focused on 3 things: direct research support to municipalities on climate mitigation and adaptation policy responses, public engagement on climate change response, and sort of capacity building on these issues among youth and sort of community leaders. So I'll give you 2 ways in which the forum has provided direct research support to address climate change. So all of us speaking today, as Professor Smit mentioned, are members of an experiential learning course called Climate Emergency and Municipal Law. We've been working with the City of Windsor and Essex County to pass a climate emergency resolution for the past 4 months. Both municipalities passed a resolution, and now we will be working again with both municipalities to sort of produce a report on sort of what can be done next. And then starting next semester, students will be working obviously with Windsor City Council, and they'll also be organizing 2 conferences. So one is in February and March. And then obviously if anybody here is interested in being a keynote speaker or sort of headlining one of the workshops, please let us know. And then just speaking overall about the course, given the enthusiasm for the course among the student body, I'm confident that it will also run next year. So another project, which I think is really directly relevant to the people here, is the Researchathon. So on November 18th, Windsor Law and Osgood Hall, which is the law school at York University, organized a Researchathon with 11 law schools across the country. So each university team focused on a specific set of questions developed by law students with input from Diane Sachs, who was the former Ontario Environment Commissioner, and environmental law specialist David Estrin. We also got direct questions from the City of Toronto and Windsor about what tools they had, so what carrots and sticks they had to address climate change. So I'll briefly mention sort of 3 of the questions we looked at. We looked at over a dozen. So one of the questions was, what sort of green procurement requirements or preferences can municipalities enact or enforce through bylaws? what can municipalities do to encourage people to retrofit their properties? What tools are available under the Residential Tenancies Act? What federal and provincial support programs are available to municipalities to address climate change? So these are direct questions that have a direct impact on some of the work that you're doing. We're collating all the responses right now. We had sort of 11 law schools and I think over 60 or 70 students participating. And our intention is to make this research available to everybody once we sort of clean it up and put it in sort of a presentable format. So it is available to you. So if this is something that's of interest to you, please contact us. We're happy to share. So I'll just give you another example of a project we've done under the public engagement and capacity building piece. From March 8th to 11th, as Professor Smit mentioned, we have a conference for high school students in Leamington. And our intention is to make sure that it's about climate change and how to tackle it. So our goal is to make this conference free of charge for every high school student. So if that's a project you or a municipality want to support, we are a supported feature project under the U and Alumni Association's Giving Tuesday campaign. So you can just donate directly through there. And then just really overall, if any of our work speaks to you, if there's something that you want to work with us on or that you want us to look into, we're open to suggestion. We're also open to any funding you may want to give us. So, because, we started this year, the Windsor Climate Action Forum. Obviously, our efforts were focused closer to home, so Windsor and Essex County. But our goal is to sort of work to any municipality that we can help. And obviously working on this research-a-thon with schools across the country, we sort of view our effort as sort of just a pan-Canadian effort. So if you're interested in additional information, the Cities and Climate Action Forum website is now online. So the link is up there. It's a really nice website. I encourage you to check it out. And obviously if you need additional information, please contact Professor Anneke Smit. It's asmit, S-M-I-T, at uwindsor.ca. So again, just to conclude, I want to reiterate Windsor Law is available and happy to help in whatever capacity. Thank you for your time.